How can we reimagine what work looks like? I'm Marco Perry. Welcome to the Perry Platform. Today's conversation comes courtesy of an April Fool's article from BlogTO. They claimed that the Ontario government was voting on a bill to mandate a 4-day work week. Now, before we get too deep into that, I just want to offer up a confession. I actually didn't even realize it was an April Fool's article at first. I thought it was legitimate. I was discussing the article with a very interesting person. Shout out to them. They'll know who they are. And I had to backtrack after I realized that I'd just been pranked. This really highlighted to me the power of fake news. Of course, this was April Fool's Day, so I should have just been aware of that to begin with, but the paradigm that we just talked about gets mapped onto everyday encounters quite frequently. You have a news source that you may interpret as being reliable, but there are some holes in the story. Of course, once again, this entire story was fabricated, but oftentimes things that happen in the real world are nuanced. They reside in a gray area, and the editor, the journalist, the writer, they may infuse an opinion into what's being laid out, and they'll shift the shade, either closer to the black or closer to the white. Now, when this happens, we fall victim to that easygoing interpretation. This can best be viewed as a resourcing problem. There's a lot of things happening in the world, and we hear about a lot of it, especially with tools like social media. Now, if we had to fact check every single thing that we saw, well, we wouldn't have enough hours in the day to do that. So, as a sort of quick check, we look out for things like a verified symbol, an outlet that has a reputation, and things like that. Of course, that is no guarantee of authenticity or even truth for that matter. Big news outlets, the most trustworthy journalists, everyone gets something wrong at some point in their career. And the outcome of that can be quite disastrous, even if the falsehood of the story, the claim, the article is easily proved. Back to this BlogTO article. It was right there at the bottom in the editor's note that basically spilled the beans. It told you that this was an April Fool's prank, but not everyone noticed that. And even though the article was clearly labeled a prank, many people left that piece thinking it was true, and I actually was one of those people at first. I did double back. The signal to me that something was up was when I tried to do further research into the topic, and I saw no other news sources talking about it. That did raise a flag. But I did see many others who were posting that same article thinking it was true. Now, if nobody points out to them that it was just a joke, they're going to go into the future thinking that this is a legitimate plan. And maybe that's going to impact the ways in which they vote in the upcoming provincial election. This is quite a promising thing. A 4-day work week being mandated by the government. That sounds great. And if you look at it from just a simple percentages point of view, of the total sample of readers, 100%, maybe half of them realized right away it was fake, the other half didn't. And the other half who didn't, maybe whatever number you want to put on it, it's not going to be 100% of them who then realized at a later point that it was a prank. There's going to be some spillage there. X% of people from that group are going to go into the future thinking that what they came across was true. And subconsciously or consciously, it could have impacts on the way they perceive the world and the actions they take, like as we talked about, their voting habits. This is the damage that can happen even with something that is so blatantly false. It was an April Fool's prank. Now take, for example, fake news that is more complicated, that is more nuanced, that is being positioned in a way where it's a little bit harder to disprove, where there's a rabid fan base there who will attack you if you do try to disprove it. Now we start to really get down the rabbit hole of what misinformation can do to people. To switch gears now, back to the topic at hand, despite the article being a joke, the idea I did find quite compelling, and I think it's a legitimate proposal. 40 hours can quite easily be divided between 4 days instead of 5. And many people would opt in for that. And we do have data showing that it would be accepted at quite a high rate. There are other countries, Scandinavian ones, who have tried something like this. reducing the amount of days you work without touching the hours. Instead of 5 days, you'll do 4, but in those 4, you'll work an extra 1.5 to 2 hours to make up for it. But in return, you get a long weekend every week. By doing this, we free ourselves a little bit more, and we're allowed to focus on our passions and things that bring us joy. In some way, I think this is something that's going to happen eventually, whether you like it or not. It could be preparing us for something like the coming AI-enabled workforce. A massive chunk of people will go from working 5 days a week to maybe 4 if something like this pilot becomes real, and then they'll go to none pretty quickly. It's simply a matter of fact that AI tech is growing quite rapidly, and you'd be amazed at how far it's come in such a short period of time. Even the job of a family doctor is on the line. I actually know an individual who is leading a startup company that's developed AI tech that can diagnose skin cancers and skin diseases at rates that are comparable, and in some cases even better, than general practitioners. Of course, there likely will be positions for experts in the actual surgeons for some time, but it's not beyond the realm of imagination to envision a cyborg robot who can operate on you. This has already happened with certain jobs like cashiers. They've been fast replaced by self-checkouts, and those aren't even AI-enabled per se. There's still that one clerk who oversees the fleet, but things that are more complicated than cashing people out seem to be on the brink of an upcoming extinction. I think it's quite easy to imagine a future where the only in-demand jobs are things along the lines of engineering, software engineering at that, and everything else is being handled by a robot that's far better than us at what they've been trained to do. The question is, when will that happen? Not if. Will it be in the next 20 years, 40, 50, 60, 100? There you can place your bets, who knows, but it does seem almost inevitable with the rate of technological progress that we will encounter that problem. And when that problem arises, that question that we just talked about, how are you going to spend your time? Are you going to be doing things that bring you meaning? Are you going to find passions? Are you going to do things that bring you joy? That's going to be a fundamental pillar that humanity has to grapple with. Otherwise, what will you be left to do? A lot of people tie their purpose to their career. And there isn't anything inherently wrong with that, but the tides of change might force you to reevaluate this. And perhaps doing something like shifting to a 4-day work week will prepare us for that. And of course, you can't talk about an AI-enabled workforce and mass human unemployment without bringing up a concept like UBI, a universal basic income. If we were to find ourselves in a position where people are just not employable because their skills are inferior to robots, well, presumably you'll still need money to do things like buy food, pay rent, go to the movies, or whatever else you want to spend money on. We've talked about UBI at length before in a couple other episodes. There are potential issues with it, but I am a believer in the concept overall. I think if we strategize properly, it can be a success, but it's not a guaranteed success. We need the right people in charge of developing the program, but it will be a key to maintaining civilization. Otherwise, I'm not sure how we'd go about managing an economy. I'm open to other ideas, but I haven't heard any other convincing solutions to this problem. We can tie the concept of a UBI back to the question of reimagining work, though. If we presume that a type of UBI will be implemented, a question comes up, well, how will that be spent? I'm betting that entertainment is going to rapidly rise there. Pretty much all of your disposable income will be spent on that, either in reality or virtual reality. If you're playing basketball in real life or on the metaverse, in the metaverse, whatever the proper terminology is there, I think that's going to be where things head. When you don't have to spend 8 hours of your day working, when the government is subsidizing you with a UBI, and you're left to your own devices, I imagine that our attention is going to shift towards keeping ourselves busy, doing things that are fun. As we talked about, things that bring you meaning. And entertainment is going to be a major driver there, whether it's you consuming it or you creating it. Many people may not find meaning in watching movies and listening to music, but you might find that meaning in making that stuff. If I had to bet on a particular segment of the economy that is positioned to explode once we get to this point of AI dominance, I'd put my money on things within the creator economy. Things like YouTube, things that either enable you to put stuff out there or to consume it easily. And they'd be the intermediary for that relationship. I think that nowadays, if a child were to tell you that they wanted to become a TikTok star, that's where they want to channel their attention. A parent could rightfully have some concerns about that. But maybe in 50 years, that ends up becoming the best possible route to go. It's certainly a possibility. The future of work may shift to fill this meaning void. To fill a void of fun seeking, a void of, hey, what do I do with my time? And this void can be filled by you creating, as we talked about, or you consuming. And of course, I think, will still have those engineering jobs that you can pursue if you have the right skills. Perhaps this shift is not that far off, but in the shorter term, what are we looking at? As talked about, that 4-day work week, I think besides the immediate benefits of us just having more time to ourselves, there is an aspect there of priming us for what the future probably is going to look like, where you're not going to have to work all that much, if at all, because we have machinery that can do everything you can do just better and more efficiently, and without needing to stop. Of course, we also have something like remote work, which the COVID-19 pandemic has thrust upon us. We're realizing that, hey, we actually don't have to commute that 1 hour to go to an office to do what we could do at home at our table while eating breakfast. This combination of a shorter work week and remote work really is freeing up a lot of time, theoretically. And it's enabling a lot of things too that we'll touch upon in a second. But another thing that we could see coming up in the shorter term is a change in assessment from the corporate side of things. Perhaps basing people's worth on outcomes versus time spent would be beneficial to every party here. This 4-day work week still hinges on the fact that you're going to be putting in 40 hours. Now, this number in some sense is a bit arbitrary. Really, what you're hired to do is a task, not to sit at a desk for 40 hours. If you can perform this task in 20 hours, well, it's actually a good thing. You're efficient. You're good at what you do. If your job is to compile statistics for a company, if you can handle all the requests that are being sent your way in a couple days, why do you have to work 4? That extra handful of hours will probably be you spending time on Reddit, watching YouTube videos, or dozing off. It actually doesn't make any sense. If we can get smarter about the time we use when working, there are benefits across the board. And here we'll segue into all the benefits of the items we just listed. So a combination of a 4-day work week and changing our perspectives to look at outcomes versus time spent and remote work is going to do a lot of good for you when it comes to time saving and the environment. Less commuting, less need to hop in a car or a plane or a train, however you travel to and from engagements. That's a win-win. Then you can do things like spend a lot of time with your family. I think this is actually quite massive. Something like maternity leave, paternity leave, there might be a lesser need for that. If you're working remotely, if you're working less days, and if your job shifts to an outcome-based model where 9 to 5 is optional. You put in the hours that you need to meet our expectations, and if you don't meet the expectations, of course, then there'll be a problem. But presumably you're qualified to do what you're hired to do. Now you can do things like raise that family. You can do things like take your kid to school and back, take them to their appointment, let the dog out, do all of these things that wouldn't be possible if you had to actually go into your office 5 days a week, 9 to 5. I guess at the core of everything here is flexibility. Now I'll just leave you with this question. Are you working to live or are you living to work? Think about that one and imagine how that dynamic might change, either because you seek the change or because a change is forced upon you due to environmental factors happening at the macro level. Now with that, it does bring us to the end of our conversation for today. If you enjoyed the material, be sure to leave a review and share. It'll help us grow. And you can find me online at perryplatform.org and on social media at perryplatform. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you soon.